What is that strange, haunting sound echoing through the forest? Why are the trees and rocks covered with blood and broken weapons? Who are the shadows moving among the fallen soldiers? How can a child, blind to the horrors around him, face the truth of war? Will he survive the shocking revelation waiting at the heart of the battlefield? Prepare to witness the chilling world of Ambrose Bierce, brought to life in a reimagined retelling on Classic Storytime Hub. Before we dive in, subscribe for your daily stories. Now, let's go. On a crisp autumn afternoon, a young boy slipped away from the rough, noisy life of his home and wandered into the forest, unnoticed. A strange, exhilarating freedom filled him. Freedom from rules, from eyes that watched too closely, from the small world he had always known. Every step into the dappled sunlight felt like a step into adventure, into a world where anything might happen. For though he was only 6, the blood in his veins carried stories of conquest and courage. Ancestors who had crossed continents, battled in wars that shaped nations, and built cities from stone seemed to whisper through him. Their restless spirits stirred as he ran among the trees, his imagination inflating every rustle of leaves into a clash of armies, every shadow into a lurking enemy. The boy clutched a simple wooden sword, rough, unpolished, barely more than a stick. Yet in his hands it was a weapon worthy of heroes. He crouched, lunged, and swung with exaggerated precision, imitating the poses he had seen in the illustrated books his father cherished, books filled with soldiers and battles, triumphs and glory. His father, a former soldier himself, had once marched into foreign lands, fought naked savages, and followed the banners of his country into distant cities. That fire, never fully quenched, lingered in the home, and now somehow seemed to live in his son. In the golden shafts of sunlight filtering through the forest canopy, the boy's world was transformed. The ordinary became extraordinary. The mundane became epic. Every movement, every imagined strike carried the weight of centuries, an inheritance of courage, of exploration, of adventure, and perhaps unknowingly, of the dark truths that lay waiting beyond the forest edge. Emboldened by the effortless victories over his invisible foes, the boy pressed on recklessly, chasing shadows with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. But even heroes can overreach. Soon he reached the edge of a shallow, rushing brook, its waters sparkling and untamed, a barrier that his imagination had never prepared him for. His foes had crossed with illogical ease, but surrender was not an option. The fire of his ancestors blazed within him, the same relentless spirit that had crossed oceans, conquered lands, and forged empires. Scanning the rocky stream, he spotted stepping stones, precarious yet possible. One careful leap, another, and he was back in the heart of battle, striking down the rear guard of his imaginary enemy with triumphant cries. Victory, however, brings its own perils, and even the smallest conqueror can be undone by overconfidence. He stepped forward expecting new glory, but instead, fate had a twist in store. There, in the very path he had chosen, sat a rabbit, upright and alert, ears twitching like sentinels, paws poised in a silent challenge. The sight froze him for a heartbeat. Then instinct took over. A scream tore from his throat, raw and terrified. He ran, branches clawed at his skin, scratches stinging with every frantic step. His small voice cried out for his mother, words lost in a tangle of sobs and panic. The forest, once a playground of glory and imagination, had become a labyrinth of shadows. Breathless, blind with tears, the boy stumbled forward, heart hammering with fear. Utterly lost, the invincible warrior of his dreams was now just a frightened child, swallowed by the wild, merciless forest. For over an hour, the boy wandered blindly, his small feet entangled in roots and brambles until exhaustion claimed him. At last, he collapsed in the narrow space between two moss-covered rocks, still clutching his wooden sword. It was no longer a weapon, just a steadfast companion in the vast, indifferent forest. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he sobbed himself into a restless sleep. Above him, the birds continued their cheerful songs, oblivious to his plight. Squirrels flicked their bushy tails as they darted from branch to branch, fearless and unconcerned. Far off, a distant, muffled rumble echoed, partridges drumming perhaps, celebrating the forest's quiet triumph over the tiny intruder who had trespassed so boldly. Back at the plantation, panic reigned. White men and black alike searched feverishly through the fields and hedges, while a mother's heart shattered with every passing moment her child was missing. Hours slipped by. When he finally stirred, the chill of evening crept into his limbs, and shadows of the forest pressed heavy on his chest. But he no longer cried. Something deep within urged him onward. Stumbling through the undergrowth, he reached a small clearing. On his right, the brook murmured darkly. On his left, a gentle slope dotted with scattered trees rose into the twilight. A thin, ghostly mist drifted along the water, curling and twisting like a living thing. It sent a shiver through him, but instead of retreating, he pressed forward, drawn toward the looming darkness of the forest beyond. Then he saw it. Something moved ahead, strange and unfamiliar, its shape blurred in the dim light. A large animal, he thought, maybe a dog, maybe a wild pig, perhaps even a bear. His heart raced as the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his next move. He had seen pictures of bears before, and in the back of his mind he had even hoped, vaguely, foolishly, to meet one. But something about this creature's awkward shuffle, its strange, jerky movements, made his curiosity shrink back into fear. It was not a bear. Something deep inside him knew it. Frozen, he watched as it drew nearer. Slowly, hesitantly, the creature advanced, and with every step his courage grew, for at least it did not have the long, twitching ears of a rabbit. There was something vaguely familiar in its clumsy, shuffling gait, yet he could not place it. Then he saw another, and another. Soon the space around him was alive with them, dozens, hundreds, crawling toward the brook in an eerie, unnatural procession. They moved in ways that made no sense, some dragging their legs while their hands pulled them forward, others pushing with their knees, arms dangling uselessly. They tried to rise, only to collapse again, falling prone to the earth. There was no rhythm to their motion, no order, no pattern, except the relentless, silent advance. Alone, in pairs, in small clusters, they came on, over and over, spreading across the clearing, streaming out of the darkening forest like a living tide. Occasionally one would stop, frozen, and then he understood. Some of them would not move again. They were dead. Others paused, raising hands in strange, futile gestures, arms lifted and dropped, heads bowed, palms upturned in gestures that seemed like prayers, echoes of human habits twisted into grotesque forms. The boy's breath caught, his heart hammered. The forest around him, once full of playful shadows and imagined enemies, had become a scene of silent horror, an endless crawling tide of men, neither living nor entirely dead, moving inexorably toward the water. The boy didn't understand everything. He could not grasp what an older observer might have noticed, the twisted horror beneath it all. To him, these were simply men, crawling like babies. Their strange, stumbling movements were unfamiliar, but they did not yet terrify him. Curiosity pushed him forward. He moved among them freely, peering into their faces with childish boldness. Their skin was pale, streaked with red in places, like paint smeared in the circus he had visited last summer. That memory sparked a laugh. These figures, grotesque and wounded as they were, reminded him of clowns. To him, it was a playful spectacle, a dark game. He even climbed onto one, balancing like he had on a pretend horse, laughing at the awkward weight beneath him. But the figure beneath was no harmless plaything. It sank under him, then flung him to the ground with a force that startled him as much as it terrified him. And then he saw the face. The lower jaw was gone, only a crimson gap from teeth to throat, fringed with ragged flesh and splintered bone. A prominent nose, the absence of a chin, and eyes fierce and unblinking gave it the look of a great bird of prey, its throat drenched in blood. The man rose, the boy scrambled to his feet. A shaking fist warned him, no longer a game. Heart pounding, he darted to a nearby tree, peering from the far side, finally understanding the danger. And all around him, the crawling mass moved on, slow, painful, relentless. A swarm of monstrous shapes dragging themselves down the slope in silent pantomime, each one grotesque, wounded, and unyielding. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the terrible procession continued, soundless, inexorable, and utterly horrifying. Instead of the forest darkening, a strange, eerie light began to glow beyond the brook. A red, almost unnatural glow pierced the trees, casting the trunks and branches into intricate black lace against the crimson sky. The crawling figures ahead were transformed, their twisted forms stretched into monstrous shadows on the grass, exaggerating every awkward movement, every grotesque stumble. The light struck their pale, blood-streaked faces, deepening the reds, highlighting the stains and wounds that made them seem almost unreal. Bits of metal and buttons glinted here and there, catching the glow and adding flashes of unsettling brilliance. Drawn by the strange spectacle, the boy stepped forward, following the glowing path down the slope. Within moments, he had moved ahead of the foremost of the crawling mass, a small achievement, yet for him it felt monumental. He raised his wooden sword as if to command the march, matching his pace to theirs, occasionally glancing back as though ensuring his army did not fall behind. Never had such a tiny leader commanded such a formidable following. Scattered along the muddy ground, pressed by the advancing procession, lay remnants of human life. Blankets rolled and tied with string, heavy knapsacks, broken rifles. They were simple objects, but in the boy's imagination they became trophies of conquest, signs of a retreating army. The earth around the creek had been churned into thick mud, trampled by countless feet and hooves, telling silent tales of the chaos that had passed through. The boy marched on, solemn and determined, a child at the helm of an army of shadows, leading them toward a destination he did not yet understand. The forest, the light, the crawling men, all seemed to converge in a strange hypnotic theater, and he, tiny and fearless, was at the center of it all. A more experienced eye might have seen what the boy could not. The footprints in the mud told a story of both advance and retreat. The forest floor had been walked over twice, trampled by desperate men moving in waves of chaos. Hours before, these same men, stricken, wounded, yet still pressing forward with their comrades, had poured through the woods in thousands. Their battalions had broken into swarms, reformed into lines, passed by the boy on all sides, and yet he had slept through it all. The roar of musketry, the crash of cannon, the thunder of battle, all had passed unheard. Clutching his tiny wooden sword, he had lain there, oblivious to the epic struggle unfolding just steps from where he dreamed. Now the fire beyond the trees across the creek bathed the landscape in a strange, otherworldly light. Smoke and flames reflected golden hues across the mist, turning the curling vapors into a shimmering ribbon of gold. The water of the brook caught the glow, dotted with streaks of red, and even the stones that jutted above the surface shone like jewels, stained by the blood of men too weak or wounded to move further. Undeterred, the boy stepped eagerly across the stones, crossing toward the fire. His wooden sword in hand, he climbed onto the far bank and paused, turning to look back at the procession of his strange companions. The march continued relentlessly, crawling, stumbling, unwavering. The advance of the army was arriving at the creek, and he, small and fearless, had taken the lead. The forest, the fire, the mist, and the shadows all seemed to bend to the strange rhythm of his journey, guiding him deeper into a world that was both terrifying and magnificent. The stronger figures had already reached the edge of the brook, plunging their faces into the rushing water. A few others lay motionless, their heads disappearing beneath the surface. The boy's eyes widened in awe. His young mind could scarcely comprehend such strange vitality, and yet such helplessness. These men, drained and broken, could not lift themselves, could not keep their heads above the water. They were drowned. Behind them, the forest opened again, revealing the remnants of his grim procession. Fewer figures moved now, but the boy's imagination filled in the rest, making them as numerous and terrifying as ever. With a bold gesture, he waved his cap to encourage them, pointed his tiny wooden sword toward the glowing fire ahead, a towering column of flame that guided this strange, shadowy exodus. Confident in the loyalty of his peculiar army, he stepped into the belt of trees. The red light filtered through the branches, illuminating his path like a spotlight on a stage. He climbed a fence, sprinted across a field, and occasionally paused to play with the shifting shadows of his followers, his laughter mingling with the crackle of the distant blaze. At last, he arrived at the ruin, a house consumed by fire. Desolation stretched as far as the eye could see, but the boy's heart leapt with delight. The spectacle of destruction enthralled him. He danced, imitating the flickering flames, gathering sticks and branches in his small hands. Every piece was too heavy to toss into the inferno, and the heat forced him back, but he did not despair for long. In a final, symbolic act, he flung his wooden sword into the blaze, a surrender to the overwhelming power of nature. His tiny military campaign had ended. As he shifted his gaze, the boy's eyes fell upon familiar shapes, outbuildings that seemed dreamlike, as if he had seen them in a memory that wasn't his own. He stared, captivated, when suddenly his entire world seemed to spin. The forest, the fields, even the horizon itself pivoted, twisting reality. And then he understood. The blazing building ahead was his own home. For a moment he froze, stunned by the enormity of the revelation. Then he stumbled forward, running in a half-circle around the burning ruin. There, illuminated by the fierce red glow, lay a figure that would forever haunt his young mind. A woman's body, lifeless, sprawled among the debris. Her pale face turned skyward, hands clutching handfuls of grass, hair tangled and matted with blood. Her forehead had been shattered, the jagged wound revealing the gray, frothy remnants of her mind, a cruel scar of the violence that had struck. The boy's small hands moved in frantic, uncomprehending gestures. From his lips came sounds both strange and terrifying, chattering, gobbling, cries that belonged neither to child nor animal, the language of anguish, of raw, unfiltered horror. He was deaf and mute, yet his terror spoke volumes. At last he stopped, trembling, lips quivering, standing motionless over the wreckage. His eyes, wide and unblinking, took in the destruction, the fire, and the ruin of his world. The spectacle of devastation was complete, and in that instant, the innocence of the child collided with the unforgiving reality of war, an unholy tableau of chaos, death, and fire.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.